So some hostile guy in the audience would get up and say, "Are you lesbians?" And Flo would always say, "Are you my alternative?"
The feminist trailblazer, journalist, and founder of Ms. Magazine is joined by her closest collaborator, Amy Richards, to reveal the stories that shaped her from her transformative moment at the 1963 March on Washington.
She said, "They only invite us to sing, but how come we don't get to talk?"
2 decades of challenging the status quo.
Because I was engaged and trying not to get married, so I needed to go very far away.
She's seen it all, and she's not done speaking up.
We're at a time that Dr. King's granddaughter and her peers have progressively lost rights.
We can't let anybody take our hopes away.
Join hosts Martin Luther King III, Arndrea Waters King, Marc Kielburger, and Craig Kielburger for an unforgettable conversation on the courage to choose your own path, the power of hope, and the truths that still need to be spoken.
Gloria, you once said, "The truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off."
When you say the phrase "piss you off," I think of...
Welcome to My Legacy. Today we're joined by a global icon who didn't just witness history, she shaped it. As a journalist, prolific writer, organizer, and co-founder of Ms. Magazine, Gloria Steinem gave voice to millions of women who had been told to stay silent. And as Gloria has shown through her decades of movement building, no one creates lasting change alone. Joining her is her close collaborator and friend, Amy Richards, a writer, producer, and movement builder in her own right, who is building on the feminist legacy Gloria ignited. Gloria, if we may say a special thank you for welcoming us into your home. If it would be all right, we'd love to start at the beginning here in My Legacy. We take you way back. And Gloria, you had a very unconventional childhood, not formally schooled until high school, traveling on the road. You wrote about your mother and mental health challenges, and you talked about how you are living the life that she never had the chance to live.
I'm sure I'm not alone in being somebody who wishes their parent could have lived the life she was born to live. My mother did actually, before I was born, work as a journalist in Toledo, at the Toledo Blade, still a newspaper there, I think. And she loved it, But once she had my older sister, and my older sister was about 6, and my father was also an unusual man. He had 2 points of pride. He never wore a hat, which his generation was supposed to do, and he never had a job. Those were his 2, right? So we were often traveling in a house trailer in the wintertime, because he hated the wintertime, to Florida or California and living in a trailer park and so on. And that meant that I didn't go to school very much. But I don't know, we all have uniqueness in our childhoods in some way. And I value things now that I didn't understand then. That, for instance, the fact that the dance bands that my father had were, some were all white, some were all black, some were both, but they were way less segregated than the world around them. And they traveled around in a bus. And also, since there were no restaurants in our rural area, my mother cooked for them. So there were always, interesting people around our dining room table, and who were all alarmingly nice to me. I think they missed their own children. So it was a good experience.
Do you think that also shaped how you saw the world? Because when you think about during that time to have these bands of, all black or all white, or even having dinner together around the table, as a child, that was normal, which I think gave you a beautiful view of the world at a time when that necessarily was not happening that often.
Yes, no, you're right. I was not aware of it. But it was a blessing.
Yeah.
After my parents separated, because my father kept going to California and so on, and my mother and I were living in Toledo, we were living in a diverse neighborhood. And once again, I don't think we were conscious of how important that really was. But partly because the heroes of our neighborhood were the football team. Right. We definitely had a diverse experience, so much so that I remember thinking it was odd when I went into someplace that was all white, where is everybody? Just as a kid, you just ask that question.
Yes.
And then, of course, after college, I went to live in India for 2 years. So that was another lesson.
Why India?
Because I'd taken a course in college, a very rare course about India, because I was engaged and trying not to get married, so I needed to go very far away. Because the Gandhian movement and the civil rights movement were very intertwined and very likely to be inspiring each other even from a distance. So it just felt more organic to go there than to go to Europe, for instance.
Gloria, you were a young journalist in 1963 on August 28th when Dad delivered the I Have a Dream speech. And you said, or at least called that day, transformative. What changed for you standing in that crowd witnessing that moment or those moments?
Washington was always a kind of integrated city, except it wasn't really integrated. So to see it actually in the form of the march looking like the city itself was just incredible. And I was standing next to a woman named Mrs. Green, bless her heart. I don't know if we never saw each other again. But Mrs. Green, a black woman, and her daughter. And I could also see through her eyes as well as through my own eyes how crucial and important this was, how the capital of our country did not belong to everybody. Yeah. And that was the first truly representative crowd I'd ever seen. And you could look back there from the monument, and it was like acres and acres and acres of people. So, it was a transforming moment to see the country as we actually looked. And there had been a lot of delegations that came from states that were way more integrated than DC itself.
I love looking at the video from the March on Washington, because if you look at it, you'll see, because it was such a hot day and a long day. And right before Martin's father got up to speak, you could see people had been cooling their feet kind of in the reflecting pond. People started putting their jackets back on, and the men would, tighten up their ties, like almost like they were getting ready to go to church. And if you were in the audience that day, could you feel when you heard the I Have a Dream speech, did you know something historical and transcendent had happened?
Absolutely. He was a genius of the repetitive theme, right? I have a dream. So it was like poetry or music. And I was close to the front, standing next to Mrs. Green and her daughter. And Mrs. Green was wonderful too, because she was a critic. So she was saying, how come there are no women on that platform?
Yes. I'm glad you brought it up.
Right.
Yes, yeah.
She said, they only invite us to sing, but how come we don't get to talk? I thought, good point. Right.
You once said that Gloria is somebody that listens more than she speaks. Could you take us back and share us a moment or a story whereby you learned something really important from Gloria, not through her words, but through her actions?
Well, there's so many things I've learned from Gloria, and it is, I would say, manner as much as it is message. And the biggest lesson, and there's many scenes of this, is not taking the bait. When somebody is sort of trying to instigate or say or provoke or just get a rise out of you, and what Gloria does so brilliantly, and this is a truly smart person who can do this, is often find the right quip or joke to turn it around in the moment, and kind of go with humor when there's nothing, when the other option would be to go with kind of engaging. And Gloria tells the story about, being away with her two good friends, Wilma Mankiller, who was the chief of the Cherokee Nation, who's no longer with us, and the novelist Alice Walker. And this kind of, for lack of a better word, entitled white male was at the table. And Alice just took her plate and got up and left the room. Wilma sort of sat there patiently for a while and then left. And Gloria sat there and just kept trying to throw in more facts and statistics and charm him to try to get to see. And I always felt like that story kind of summed it up. It was like, I'm going to change your mind, whether
work?
or not. I don't know in that instance that it did, but I think in other instances that it did. And I do think, it's been amazing to hear Gloria tell stories and then go back and read articles or, about the March on Washington as a case in point. Gloria has also talked about sitting up, close to the, Lincoln Memorial, and because she had press credentials, she could get a little bit closer than the average attendee. And remembers Mahalia Jackson saying, tell him about the dream.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's so
wow.
often the emotion of it. It's not the fact of it. It's what you were feeling, when you were watching, and the kind of revelatory moment of Mrs. Green next to me saying, "Where are the women speakers?" Right.
And that was not necessarily a consciousness that you even had at that time, to say
Yeah,
where
I
are the
wasn't
women.
questioning it because I thought, I was knocked out to be there in the first place. So she was teaching me.
Absolutely. I love too that it shows too that we're constant students, and I think that's what also makes both of you all such brilliant storytellers, is that you're listening to the stories and then translating that for your readers and your viewers.
Well, also I've learned that our brains are organized on narrative. So. And there's a saying about that, tell me a fact and a Native American saying from Wilma, tell me a fact and I'll forget, tell me a story and I'll always remember.
I just thought it was so powerful reflecting on the March on Washington for a moment that, to your point, we all know you as this icon, an incredible icon, but even Gloria Steinem had to become Gloria Steinem, that you were in the audience that day and it didn't immediately leap to you the injustice of the gender parity or lack of parity on that stage. I just think that's so powerful for our listeners and viewers who may feel that they're not yet at your stage as awareness or movement building, that you had to go through your journey to become the awareness, the icon, the change maker you are.
But as you were saying that, I was thinking that actually I think it's way more common. I remember a little girl saying, she was maybe 6 or something, and she's saying to me, I think maybe she wrote to me because she said, we girls are angry as turnips. And because we never get the good part of the playground. The boys get the good part of the playground. We just get a little place where we can play jacks over here. I thought, this kid is going to be a revolutionary.
Yes. I wonder where she is now.
Yes, right.
And I do think that's true I don't think it's true exclusively for females, but I do think women often come to injustice on behalf of other people before they come to injustice on behalf of themselves.
Absolutely.
And so I think it's not uncommon in a women's narratives that you'll hear that I got angry about kids not being equal. I got angry about the football team taking all the resources. And then you're like, oh, wait, I have to get angry about myself too.
Yeah, we may overdo empathy. And that perhaps because women identify with our children, who are not all female, right? We can more easily identify with everybody.
That whole thing about, being bold and unapologetic, and speaking up and taking space.
Taking space is huge.
Like just taking space as women and feeling confident to do so.
No, and that was really the beginning of and the continuing theme of a very diverse women's movement, which is one, sitting in a circle, not in a hierarchy. Two, do we look like the country? If not, why not?
Well, but when you talked about too, do we look like, are we representative of the world? Because one of the things that I loved growing up is Miss Magazine. And it was one of the first magazines that I remember as growing up that you could see all hues of women at any given issue. It wasn't, like if there was someone, I'm not going to name a magazine, that, that was of color on other magazines, it became, it was news in and of itself. But at Miss, it was always eked into the fiber of the magazine. And so I want to go back to when you started Miss Magazine and just the fact that you gave millions of women language they hadn't at that point been allowed to say out loud. What would you say was the boldest thing that you did in those early years of the magazine that scared you, but you did it anyway? Because that's one of the things that we teach our daughter is that it's not feeling fear, but courage is when you feel fear and you do it anyway.
When you say that, I think of something that maybe you don't have in mind, which is advertising.
Okay.
And because women's magazines were, of course, dependent for money and profit and everything on advertising, and because advertising was pretty segregated by gender too, because the car makers were not convinced that women drove cars, and they even thought it devalued cars if women were shown driving them. I mean, there were all kinds of crazy reasons that we couldn't get the advertising we should have got. And because I'd been working for Esquire, I realized, wait a minute, they got this advertising.
So you knew.
What's wrong with us? And we actually had to become a foundation so we could raise money in a different way.
Oh, wow. So that's how you got crossed that by starting your own foundation.
That was later in its existence.
So that you wouldn't have to be as dependent.
The magazine was owned by a foundation.
Yes.
Right.
Now, Amy, was there a moment that Gloria encouraged you to take a risk that you wouldn't have taken on your own?
Well, I don't think I wanted to be a writer necessarily. I was an observer and I was an activist, and I created an organization called Third Wave, and through that I was collecting a lot of stories of primarily young people doing amazing things. We did a cross-country voter registration drive called Freedom Summer '92, very much inspired by the civil rights marches that had also taken place in the South. And stories are compelling, and I'd be like, somebody has to write about this. I had a lot of journalist friends, and I'd say, you should write about this person or this organization. And Gloria was like, you should write about it. And so because I was not somebody who thought of myself as a writer, it took me a while, but then I did jump in and started writing articles and eventually wrote books. And so
thank goodness that you did.
Taking that leap, thank you.
Gloria, for so many baby boomers, and Gen X women, you were the face of feminism. And you inspired millions upon tens of millions of people. Wanted to ask, who or what inspired you along the way?
I was inspired not to be the face of feminism because I'm not. We're a big, diverse country. So it helped to give me the courage to speak, and never by myself. Dorothy Pittman Hughes, who was a pioneer of the first child care center here. Flo Kennedy, the wonderful, outrageous civil rights lawyer, Flo Kennedy. And, there's a whole series of people on purpose spoke together. And there were certain lucky things that I lived in India for 2 years after I graduated from what was not a segregated college, but was alarmingly white. So, I was in a country that was very diverse and looked way more like the world, and was trying to look even more like the world. That was just lucky. And that I could freelance, as a writer, and not always make a great living, but always make a living, which is really lucky.
We're at the point in time in our history. We talked about the March on Washington. If there is nothing else that anyone can remember from the speech, it is, when Dr. King talked about his 4 little children. Well, he had 4 children. He only has one grandchild, our daughter, Yolanda. And we're at a time that Dr. King's granddaughter and her peers have progressively lost rights. They're the first generation, particularly black women, but all women, but that have lost rights since they were born rather than gain them. That hasn't happened since the end of Reconstruction and the beginning of the passage of black codes. As 2 women who have been on the forefront of women's equalities and women's rights. Are you all hopeful?
Well, first of all, I would just like to say we can't let anybody take our hopes away, because hope is in itself a form of planning. We can try to create in the groups and organizations and living rooms, you know, where we are, groups that do look like the country. And if they don't, ask ourselves, how come? Why not? You know, what are we missing here? We can find different paths to that. I mean, Wilma Mankiller, the chief of the Cherokee Nation, for instance, was a great, as you know, as she said, the only good thing Europeans brought was the horse. So, so was always a great force for representativeness. And also just selfishness. I mean, we do not learn from sameness. We learn from difference. Diversity is a gift. It's not, it drives me crazy that it's viewed as an obligation or something painful. It's totally a gift.
And yet living in a more diverse world is what is exactly threatening to some people right now that makes it harder. But I do feel, just to answer that, I do feel optimistic that there is a lot of change that can still happen in the world. And I was at an event 2 nights in a row, and I did look around and I felt like I was seeing the benefits of 2016, meaning I think that what happened in the 2016 election was that somebody got elected that nobody thought would get elected, and a lot of people thought, oh my gosh, if that person can do it, I can do it. And there's obviously a lot of other negative responses that came, but I thought that that was a positive one. And I looked around this room, and even when I graduated from college in 1992, and a lot of my peers felt like in order to be respected, in order to be successful, you had to be exceptional. And I don't want to undermine the accomplishments of women today, but I think that now there is a narrative that you can be good enough and be successful. And I think that that makes the opportunities so much more democratic and available to a lot more people. I mean, Melinda Gates was telling this story that, you know, she knew that she was going after a certain level of success when she was in high school, and she was mad at her parents for not sending her to a certain high school in Dallas, where she was from, and realizing that the only other than workaround was for her to become valedictorian, because that was the way to kind of signal her, you know, to kind of signal that she was exceptional. And I do think that, yes, it's still great for people who have those ambitions to be that, but I think you're still going to be rewarded and appreciated even if you're not valedictorian as a woman. You know, I think that there was a moment where that's what you had to do. And so I'm hopeful that there are just more people doing more things, and that that's is going to carry us.
One thing I have seen with younger women over the last couple of years in particular is even more of a resoluteness. I think that, you know, that there was, as some of the older women were like, oh my goodness, there seemed to be this new fire and urgency and resoluteness that I've seen with younger women, and that's what gives me hope. I think that we're in great hands with.
Where are you seeing it, especially in schools or in work?
Through your daughter?
Definitely through our daughter, through the conversations that we had. Because one of the hardest calls that I had to make after the election, and not because of Kamala Harris not winning, but because of having to talk to my daughter in that same conversation that Black women have had so many times with our daughters, that you are good enough. You know, I'm sorry that maybe the world is not ready for, you know, to see your brilliance and your light. And so I think I was approaching it kind of from that old hat, like, oh, you know, but what I've seen even within that conversation, our daughter approached it from, oh, we're going to, you don't have to apologize to us because we are going to absolutely continue the march and finish what was started. Like, this has made us not give up. This has made us even more. I've seen more girls talk about changing their major, even in college, and they want to major more in storytelling, in law, to understand the law, because as our daughter says, you have to understand the law so you can change the law. So the ways in which they're preparing themselves, the ways in which they're organizing, as we're talking to activists, young girl activists around the nation, they seem more focused and ready to organize and to really show how bold and unapologetic, and they're ready to take up space.
Okay, I'm ready to vote for your daughter.
And that's what these young women are like, now. People think a lot about Martin's father when they see her, and I see her grandmother. When you talked earlier about the fact of, we kind of live out sometimes our parents' wishes, I see as glorious as her grandmother, Coretta Scott King, was, and as much as she did, I see her in her granddaughter that I'm even gonna, even more so, or continue to stand up and to stand out and keep moving it forward. So.
But also, I'm just thinking while you're saying that of Coretta and I sitting in at the LaGuardia airport here, talking, and what she wanted to do was go dancing.
Yes.
Right? So we have to, your daughter has to, if she wants to, also go dancing.
Oh, trust me, she
does.
She does.
And
She does,
Coretta
for sure.
spoke at the 77 Houston conference, the 1977 Houston conference, and kind of brought the house down.
And I love too, though, because that is important, and that's one of the things that we hope to give Yolanda, the freedom also to have the fun. That goes back to your point of living our parents' lives, in full glory, all that they thought that they couldn't do. So yes, we hope for her a lot of dancing, and trust me, she gets it in. She gets it in. Now, you've spoken openly about getting abortion when it was illegal, and you said that it didn't define you, but it did shape you. What's one thing that you wish people understood better about that part of your story?
Well, as Flo Kennedy always said, if men could get pregnant, abortion would be a sacrament.
Amen.
So the beginning of democracy is that we get to make decisions over our own physical selves. And, I don't think that that's the projection, really, either because men assume it and women still don't have it. I'm not sure. But I do think we need to emphasize it more, that we get to make decisions over our own bodies.
Well, and the doctor who performed your abortion, made you promise two things. It was that you wouldn't reveal his name.
Oh yeah, that I would never tell
I
anybody, and that I would do what I wanted to do with my life. How great is that?
Wow.
Right.
And I think that commitment is.
That also then helped shape you at getting, through that too. Like to have that. Can you think about so many women that don't have that support?
I dedicated a book to him.
Yeah.
Probably long after he was able to appreciate it, but anyway, I did. Right.
If this conversation is resonating, we'd love for you to subscribe to the show and maybe share it with someone who needs to feel a little less alone today.
Gloria, you once said, the truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off. Love that quote. What's the truth that absolutely pissed you off, and how did that inspire you?
Well, when you say the phrase piss you off, I think of Trump. Okay.
How did that inspire you?
Well, getting rid of him inspires me. We're in Manhattan where like 96% of people are against him because we know him, right? And I think that's really important for reasons that are not necessarily part of our press or, stories. We either have just become or on the verge of becoming a majority people of color country. And I think that those folks who say you will not replace us are thinking of that. And that is awful, that's crazy. That's anti-democratic, it's anti-everything we hope for. But it doesn't get named enough, including about Trump.
Amy, if I could pull you into this conversation, because when I look at Gloria's legacy, I think of how much work that she has spent engaging the next generation, including literally co-founding Take Our Daughters to Work. You know, that incredible movement. And Amy, I look at you reaching across generations, continuing that movement, continuing to redefine it and reinvent it constantly. And I'm curious from your point of view, Amy, why does Gloria's message still so deeply resonate with the current generation, even though this is now spanning decades?
I mean, I think that what Gloria says has had profound impact, and what she writes has had profound impact, and there's very few people who have one-liners like Gloria does, and, you know, is infinitely quotable. But I think that the most important example that Gloria has given across generations is just her example of how she lives her lives. I mean, living independently, you know, as a single woman, making her own income, getting up, you know, even when it was terrifying, and speaking in public. And, you know, it was more what she was doing that I think is, and in her generation, that was bolder and braver because it was less popular of a choice and therefore less accessible of a choice. And a lot of women who thought, oh, if only I could do that. And I think, you know, my generation, younger generations definitely have more examples of how that is possible, but it's still a threatening choice to make the unconventional choice. And it also is still a financial reality that not many women can afford to live in. I mean, most women I know who have some level of financial success married it or inherited it. So there's still few examples of women being able to live truly independent lives. So I think it's just that example that is one that resonates across generations.
As you're saying that, I'm thinking about the more people would do it if they understood the real life rewards. Maybe we should write about it, you know, because people stop you in the street, you know, and say thank you for this or that.
I mean, it's a simplification to say this, but I think Gloria made being different okay, and I think that a lot of other people either
That's powerful, though.
were
That's
cousin,
so powerful.
yeah. And the only other person, and you're going to laugh when I give this example, that I've seen that has a similar kind of on the street reaction, in the airport reaction, is the skateboarder Tony Hawk. And it's because skateboarding was this weird thing that loser kids did, and he made it like, no, you can do it, and you can make a career out of it. You can be successful at it. You can have fun while you're doing it. And I think that is, you know, not, you know, it's doing it and doing it graciously and gracefully too. That is, I think.
I never compared myself to the skateboarder.
I know.
I'm so impressed.
I think he would also compare himself to you, so that's a good.
I think it also means too that not only did you make it okay, but you also made it cool. Like to be yourself and to be independent and to be like, so then it really became this path, and it became a cool thing.
Yeah.
And so therefore even more acceptable.
It is funny how people still use these shoulds to like define their lives. I mean, I'm not legally married, but I have like the most heteronormative life, and I even have like a station wagon and a dog, like so. But the friends who, and just other people in the world who were the most threatened by it were people who wanted to make different choices but didn't feel invited to, or that they could.
Yeah.
And there's this, I get this sense of like, oh, I would have done that too, but my parents wouldn't have allowed it. And I think that, again, like Gloria didn't, you know, yes, she's radical in the sense of she's going to the root on these issues, but you just did it without apologizing for what you were doing. And I think that is, people still want like permission to do something that's outside of the box. And if only I could. And I think, you know, Gloria's example is, well, I did. You know, she would never say that, but I think that it is.
You know, you have also been the source of attacks. Like, it hasn't been easy. We get to sit here and praise you now. You know,
Which is great, I have to say.
But, you know, you know, when you look at the vitriol that's come your way, you know, how did that affect you, and how did you overcome that?
Well, when you say that to me, I imagine, because when Dorothy Pittman Hughes or Flo Kennedy, or, you know, when we were speaking together, which actually we started out partly because I was afraid to speak by myself, also because I didn't want the women's movement to be represented by one white woman, you know, that at least we could have a little diversity. So some hostile guy in the audience would get up and, you know, when Dorothy or Flo Kennedy, we were speaking together, and say, are you lesbians? And Flo would always say, are you my alternative? And it was...
Gloria would also respond with fact, and Flo would say, if you have a truck on your leg, it doesn't matter how much the truck weighs, get the truck off my leg. You know, it's like Gloria would always try to arm with with statistics.
I mean, I did it out of both fear and friendship, you know, because I was afraid to do it by myself and we were friends and so. But it taught me a lesson about how important it is to do things together that illustrates whatever it is you're trying to say.
But I will say that, you know, another lesson that you have taught is, you know, your enemies also say a lot about you, and there's a lot out there that I want as my enemy because I don't want to be on their side and perceive to be on their side.
Can you say that again? That was brilliant. Just one more time.
The enemies, you want them as enemies because you
Mm-hmm.
don't want them to be on your side.
I understand.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the hard, and this is, I can speak personally about this, I think the harder criticism is when it comes from people that are around you. And you know, criticism is one thing, but the hatred is maybe too extreme of a word, the undermining or the jealousy, and I'm sure you experience this, I'm sure your parents experienced this, but the hardest thing for me to watch is when supposed allies of Gloria's will kind of try to subtly undermine her or be mean to her, and you know, and quite frankly, jealous of, you know, maybe that she can withstand certain things that other people can't. And that's, so I think the vitriol that comes, maybe that's too extreme of a word, but I would say the more latent, like passive aggressiveness that comes from the people that are supposed to be your friends and your allies is kind of the hardest.
How do you deal with that?
Well, fortunately, I have Amy.
She has
Amy, yeah, I want Amy
not
on my
good at
side.
conflict. That's the...
Yeah, no, I mean, you friends are chosen family, right? And you always need this circle, but sometimes you need it more than before, you know, when you're really feeling unjustly accused or wounded or ridiculed or whatever it is. So you need to be willing to ask for help or ask for comfort or say, okay, am I fucking up here? Is that the problem? If so, tell me. You know, you need that.
One of the punishments of being a recognizable person, and I'm sure you've experienced this in your own lives, is that people stop telling you the truth. You know, either because they're in a position to try to protect you, or because you think that you're above it. So they're like, I'm not gonna, I mean, I'll never forget being at a table with a famous person and they had food in their teeth and nobody was telling them. And I was like, excuse me, you have food, you have spinach in your teeth. And, you know, just subtle things like that. And I do think that honesty and being able to say, Gloria, you shouldn't have said that, or, you know, is something that you really need when you are in a higher profile position.
Gloria, what have you learned from Amy about how the next generation leads differently, and what gives you hope watching them matriculate?
We just did a speaking thing together, sort of. I mean, Amy was asking me questions and we work together a lot, but I don't always get to see her in public. And I thought to myself, this woman is brilliant, amazing, right? Hopefully we're able to continue to appreciate each other in different ways, and also constructively criticize to help us become better, not be afraid to do that. And that is like the very best part of a family. We do it with our children, I think, even though I don't have children. But we sometimes forget to do it with our friends.
We're so inspired being in your home. I have to ask you a very personal question. Behind the Kings is a beautiful photo for those who are not able to watch and see of an elephant being very close to maybe a young monk or a young person who's reading. I see elephants here. I see a beautiful door from India. I see elephants, of course, to our left. What do you love most about elephants?
Elephants are my totem, you know. They're huge, they're gentle, they don't hurt anything, they don't kill anything, they eat the bark off trees, they're matrilineal, and they're kind of the ideal people.
That's so lovely.
Actually, someone just reshared this photo yesterday. For Gloria's 80th birthday, a group of people had gone to Botswana, and some of those people, including Gloria and another friend, had been to this same location maybe 8 years before. And the oldest in the group, Kathy, came right up to Gloria and this other woman and took the trunk and wrapped around the two of them. Someone just reshared the photo yesterday, but it is, you know, they don't forget.
Well, it's been such a privilege to watch this friendship and a privilege to be able to sit in your home. I just want to say that alone is a pinch myself moment. And listening to the two of you,
I
it's
have
just such...
talking circles here all the time. You're welcome to come.
Are we invited? We're
They're
coming.
not that unique.
But in this conversation, in this podcast, in this broadcast, we get a chance to sit with icons. Your life has taught and shown through action that change is hard. Change happens across decades. It happens across generations. It happens in homes and kitchens and front lines and pickets and workplaces and magazines and printing, and it happens across multiple aspects. You remind us that the need to constantly choose hope, to constantly bring friendship and laughter and joy into conversations, and to continuously not be defined by others' expectations. And it's been such a privilege to be a witness to your friendship. Obviously, to live in a world that you helped shape. The world owes you a debt of gratitude. And we all owe you a debt of gratitude for joining us on My Legacy and sharing your legacy with us. Thank you both today.
Thank you for joining us. New episodes drop every Wednesday with bonus content every Thursday. Don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss a moment.